So this other person that writes in, she says, "I'm a mother to a daughter, almost 12, with a very rare syndrome, with mental and physical disabilities and a lot of health problems. I often feel powerless and anxious about the health problems that endlessly seem to come. For example, bladder infections and epilepsy. I'm also pretty exhausted of taking care of her almost 24/7, being on high alert all the time, which I do with all my love. And sometimes I wish I wouldn't have to because I'd love to rest. I love her to pieces, and I use the hardship we encounter to enhance my spiritual growth. I have 3 friends on the spiritual path, all believing we create our own experience. As in, when we believe we won't get ill from a cold, we won't. When we concentrate on what we want, all those things will come to be. Everything that happens to us is our own doing, conscious or unconscious. That would also mean the health issues my daughter's experiencing are my creation or hers. They say that if I would be awake enough, this wouldn't happen. One of them said that the spiritual explanation of epilepsy is attracting attention with underlying unresolved frustration and anger, which I facilitate with my style of parenting, seeing her in her anger and trying to find a working solution. If I wouldn't, there would be no epilepsy. They also believe in a higher self story, and before we came to earth, we chose our path and the people we would be here with and the lessons we would learn. They say they are more advanced on the spiritual path, and I just don't get it yet. I am not enough rooted in my base chakra. Now, I feel sadness when taking this in. When they try to convince me of this, I don't feel seen or supported, maybe even somewhat mistreated, a lack of compassion. I know this is my ego, nonetheless, it hurts. The only thing I myself seem sure of is that life happens, that what happens on the outside is not in my control, maybe only how I react. Do I create suffering by resisting or desiring something else than that which is happening? Or are the glasses I put on coloring the world I see, pink or gray? I see the beliefs as that it is a story. It might be true, but how can we know? It seems to me all the higher self story, and I create my own reality. I'll just say, add the word story, might be a way of trying to be in control of life where there is none, I think. But also, I also doubt myself. Am I the one who doesn't get it? And then she goes on. Um, so I think I'll um, just finish with one of her other sentences. Am I creating the bad fortune, luck, health for my child and myself? My ego can't stand the idea of that being true. And if so, how am I going to change that so she won't fall ill anymore? So I really just feel for this person. Um, and this is one of those kind of questions where when I read it, I ask myself, like, how can I respond to this question without getting myself in a lot of hot water? Because I think that the main dilemma with a question like this is that it's presenting people with different worldviews, and I believe that that's kind of the dance of life, you know. Like there's almost I probably as many worldviews as there are human beings, and there's certain things that several people can come to consensus on. And we might even gravitate towards certain friends or communities where we feel like we share a certain kind of baseline consensus of how we view life and reality. And sometimes we enter into those communities or those groups because we feel a resonance to begin with, or sometimes we enter into these groups and sort of take on their worldview, and when those are kind of really rather odd or skewed, sometimes we call those cults. Um, but I think that what I like to do as a person, because I tend to be a person of moderation, and again, I'm not saying that you should be how I am, but I'll just share with you my feeling about these different worldviews that this person has presented. Um, I'm a person who tries to see what maybe the upsides or positive aspects of certain worldviews are. And I also try and see the limits of those worldviews. And what I do is I compare them to my own direct experience and what I know and sense, and just kind of see where things match up. And so, in the worldview of some of this person's friends, in my view, there's a kind of pointer for us to recognize that we can be stewards of our own thought. We can we can guide our own thoughts or invest our energy in thoughts that are constructive. That sets very like setting clear intentions and being positive and um, having a sense of responsibility and agency in our life where we we're clear about where we'd like to um, not only put our attention, as I said before, energy, but try to steer things as best we can. And sometimes that goes extreme, and it's becomes more manipulative. It's trying to like manipulate experience, and instead of sort of seeing how things are presenting and kind of aligning and being in harmony with them, we're trying to influence them in certain directions. And sometimes that's wisdom, and sometimes that's folly, and sometimes it's illusory. And so I think that this person's questioning her friend's worldview is healthy because it's good to question worldviews. And I think that her worldview has some tremendous benefits as well. So what I like to do is kind of take the positives of each one, but try not to become fundamentalist about either worldview, and kind of like sense which aspects of it resonate. I'm familiar with many people who have the worldview of this person's friends, and sometimes it can be challenging for me. You know, um, I'll just give you a example. One time I was talking to a friend of mine. She doesn't have this worldview exactly. No, she doesn't have it at all, really. But I mean, she's not a fundamentalist, is what I'm trying to say. But she did. We were having a conversation where she brought forward sort of like a kind of example of enlightened expression that she thought I could rise up to in a conversation. And so I was telling her that I had this neighbor. This is about 20 or 25 years ago. I had this neighbor who would come out of her house, the house where she lived. She was being cared for by the people who owned the house next door. And she would come out when she'd see my car coming down the street when I was coming home from work, and she would, and I'd usually be carrying work bags or groceries or things like this. And she'd come out and she'd stand between my car door and my house door, and she wouldn't move. And like if I tried to step one way, she'd step that way and kind of, and then I'd step the other way. And she was wanting to make sure I gave her attention before I could, like, put my groceries down or go into my house, and this was happening every day. And I was saying to a close girlfriend of mine, I guess you could say I was blowing off a little steam, like, "This is getting ridiculous, and this is not not what I want to be happening. I really like to get into my house and put my groceries down." And, my friend said, "Well, I heard a story about this," and or she used to work with Byron Katie, and she said, "Well, what Byron Katie would say to this is that, or what she does is she just hugs the people." And I and I said to my friend, "I don't wanna hug her. I wanna put my groceries down." And, my friend went, "Got it, got it." So she caught on really quickly, but she kind of was telling me, like, "This is what an enlightened person would do." Maybe. Like, it was I'm reading that into it just for fun for the story, but she was basically saying, like, this is this is, like, sort of a very highly, evolved person and how they would respond. And so, I think I just said to her something like, "I really just wanted to tell you that I was bothered by this, like, you don't have to solve it for me." And she's like, "Okay." So what was funny was over time, I was working this out. I could have worked it out a million different ways. I could have just said, "You know what? I don't like this." I could have said, taken it to an extreme, and I could have said, "You're on private property and you're blocking me from getting into my own house. Do you want me to call the police?" I could have taken it to all different kinds of directions, right? But what I did was I just started telling her, like, "Can you wait here? I need to go put the groceries down. I'll come out and visit you." And so she and I would have this little routine. Like every night when I'd come home, she'd just visit me. And at first it was like for 10 minutes. And she'd tell me all about her day. Usually it was things that were troubling her. And then each day when she saw that I would do this consistently for her, it would get shorter. It'd just be like a minute. And she just wanted to talk to me for a minute. But what happened eventually was all she wanted was a hug, and I would hug her. And I was basically doing what Byron Katie did, but I got to that place in myself of just spontaneously wanting to do that, and then it just became like she would pop over, not every day, but every few days just for a hug, and, that was the outcome of that story. But I had to be with where I was at first and just be with my own process and find my own way with it and not just use some prescriptive notion that, one of my friends told me about how to live my life. And even when I did hug this woman in the end, there was no thought like this is what Byron Katie would do. That was long gone from my mind. I was just really with this woman and having these encounters and just following my nature of how to have a direct encounter with this neighbor. And so when I read these stories about how this mother who wrote in is so with her child, and so present with her child in love, I think about what a great teaching that is. And, you know, do we come into parenthood, knowing all the, perfect boundaries and the perfect ways to parent? Who does? I mean, I'd be hard pressed to know that anyone knows exactly how to do that, how no matter how enlightened they are. There's all kinds of scenarios and situations that people come into that are new territory and new learnings. And I think that what goes a great distance is who we are internally, like what we bring to what we do. It's yes, it can be important what we do, but I believe perhaps vastly more important is who we are and what we do, what we bring to what we do. Was it, I get I'm terrible with certain pronunciations and remembering certain names, but I think it's Maya Angelou said, like, I think it was her, like, you might forget what somebody said or what they did, but you don't for, what you don't forget is how they made you feel. And I think that that's, so powerful, like what presence we bring to what we do. And I do think that when people concretize on their worldviews and perspectives, it tends to go up into mind. And it does sometimes keep them out of touch in that kind of fundamentalist thinking, out of touch with our hearts and with our presence and with their essential self and and how we bring our essence of self into our moments of relating and into our day. So for me, that's what's super important. And the other thing I could say is that when the mind is more quiet, which is where I began this evening, when the thinking mind is more quiet, it operates in a really different way. We're engaged with what's happening with a lot less narrative about what we want to be happening or what should be happening or shouldn't be happening. There's there's a way of engaging that it just kind of allows us to step out of the navigator that would need to even set specific intentions. I know I'm kind of maybe being confusing because there's a time to set intentions, especially when we're kind of more foreground in that individuated self. But sometimes there's a time when the mind's quiet and there's no reference to our identity or sense of self. And there's not even referencing our intentions or how we want things to go. And we're just with what's ever happening. So I've been in a lot of situations where, let's say, a retreatant falls and, they get injured or, um, somebody ends up in the hospital or, there can be a distressing situation. But I feel like in my best moments, I'm just with what's happening. I'm not, I'm not thinking that's a negative thing or that that shouldn't have happened or, if I'm with a person who's dying of cancer, I'm not thinking, um, they could have prevented this if they were more enlightened. I mean, Suzuki Roshi died of cancer, or I'm sure there's a lot of spiritual teachers that are considered enlightened that died of an illness or a, a sickness, and it's only a thought in our minds that says that that's an unenlightened expression. But when the mind is quiet, we're just with what's happening, you know? And I think that's a real gift. And we can take that gift into realms of, pain or difficulty or ill health or suffering. And that's a beautiful arena to express our love. And love doesn't operate in those realms of some litmus of enlightenment. That should look a certain way. I find that it cuts a person off from just truly being present for whatever's happening and being in harmony with that, with a kind of allowance that they're not even thinking about, but they're just able to express from their heart and be of service in those moments and roll up their sleeves and help the sick or the dying or help themselves in their humanity. I think that that's a really beautiful thing. So I'm very, very grateful that you're a mother who's engaging in your motherhood. And I also wish for you some time to get some rest and um, have time for yourself. You might enjoy an inquiry like, what is rest in the middle of your activity of being with your daughter or, you know, in times where you're not with your daughter? To just invite that sense of rest, like an inquiry, what is rest, can invite that sense of rest into activity. You can use it like an evocation to evoke what your body knows of rest, what your that posture is, what that energetic is, what that attunement can bring, and you might sense more rest within activity.